Hello out there. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about the relationship between quantum physics and consciousness, and we're going to talk a lot about what that actually isn't. Part of what inspired me to tackle this subject tonight was that I recently sort of reinvestigated, I guess, some ideas that I had encountered, 10, 20 years ago to sort of check their veracity. And I was a little disappointed with what I found. So do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon if you can. Links in the description. So thousands of years ago, for example, in the time of Pythagoras, it was typical for a scientist and a mystic to be the same person. Pythagoras is a great example of that. And over time, science definitely developed this sort of absolute atheistic, deterministic material position. And it is my contention that that actually precludes a lot of observation. So it's a balance that I think very few people have been able to really walk well. It takes a lot of discernment. A lot of people, Russell Brand, for example, I've heard him say that he's afraid that if he opens the door to spirituality at all, that he's like letting in the possibility that it'll become diluted or, and so checking our metaphysics against physics, since everything is a reflection, the reflections of each other anyways, if they're correct, seems like a no-brainer. But then there are misinterpretations. And in pop culture, because this has become a saleable idea, people really like the concept that they can use their consciousness to influence reality. And for what it's worth, I think that it's true. But I think a lot of ideas are being sold to people that are even intentionally misrepresented. And I'll give you the best example that I'm aware of. The double slit experiment is cited as the inspiration for the concept of the observer effect, which states that you cannot observe a particle without having an effect. And what that actually means in physics is that interaction with a measuring device or another particle or something is necessary even to make the observation. And in the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? Very, very popular, made by Fox, which made me suspicious, and it turns out rightfully so. They, in that film, and a lot of other people make this interpretation as well, kind of, it's lunatic logic where they'll say, because a camera is making an observation, this means that consciousness affects subatomic particles. It doesn't actually mean that. For one thing, we're not really sure that the camera is conscious. And there isn't a conscious being looking through the camera when it takes this picture. So there has to be acknowledgement, at least, that this isn't really proof the way that it's often presented. And to further sort of illustrate that movie, that they were consciously misrepresenting some of these concepts, if you watch the, what are they called? Like bonus features, there are interviews with some of the physicists that are actually complaining that they edited the film in such a way as to misconstrue what the physicists were actually saying and making it appear that they're saying things that they're not. So I think it's easy for us to take for granted the extent that people will go through to make an idea more appealing to people and therefore more marketable. But that doesn't mean that there's no truth to this. And there are even very respectable physicists, Robert Hagel, I think is his name. It's definitely in the description there. You know, he's worked at CERN and other major laboratories, definitely respected. He's also the leader of the Transcendental Meditation movement in the United States. And he, along with a lot of other physicists, are saying that the unified field that permeates everything, and you can almost think of it as like a blue screen that is where subatomic transfers and activity takes place and manifests. They're suggesting that at the very foundation is consciousness, that the unified field is pure consciousness. And obviously there are some difficulties with this because, you know, the hard problem in the study of the brain or consciousness, I guess, is that we don't know what consciousness is, how it arises. So to suggest that there is evidence that something we can't even define is the foundation of our reality is, you know, it's almost an untenable position. And so one of the other arguments against the Copenhagen interpretation is that the multiverse theory. And I would still point out that this doesn't preclude the possibility that the observer is having some kind of effect. This alternate explanation of the observer effect is that when these particles are measured, because, and I didn't say this before, but part of the Copenhagen interpretation is that all particles exist in all potential possibilities simultaneously. And when they're observed, they collapse into a singularity or they make a decision. So this alternate theory is that what actually happens is that the particles fulfill every potential possibility in different dimensions. And this is the multiverse theory. Again, though, I don't think this necessarily changes the possibility that the observer's consciousness is having some kind of effect. It's just an alternative explanation of how this manifests. This is a really interesting element of it's not necessarily related to consciousness, but I think it's still related to this topic, the theory of entanglement. Every particle that has ever been connected remains connected and can communicate instantly no matter the distance. So if there is a cosmic speed limit, which is supposed to be the speed of light, there's no way for a transfer to take place by means of information actually moving. So what occurred to me about this yesterday, and it was kind of a mind-blowing realization that I didn't realize it earlier, but this is one of those rare cases where science has actually acknowledged the impossible according to the parameters that they operate within. So I thought that was really powerful, and I'm trying to communicate that I think we really need to absorb a discovery like that, because the implications of it are potentially that consciousness, that a conscious universe could be an explanation for that type of phenomenon. And also the extent that we're acknowledging that we have discovered at least one phenomenon that should be impossible. And so that's a powerful one. Okay, so let's take this idea to its logical conclusion. If the observer effect does in fact mean that consciousness has an effect on subatomic particles, and that energy only exists in probability clouds until it's observed, this means that physics has found God, basically, because it implies that no form ever would have congealed if the energy had not been observed. And so I really, the irony of that is palpable, that this practice or this discipline of science that has been so atheistic, it may be that a branch of science has detected evidence, I guess, that some kind of consciousness preceded order. Speaking of entanglement and consciousness, the Veery bird I mentioned in the title, this is only loosely related, but I did mention the bird, and this is amazing. There's a scientist who is studying the Veery, which is a small brown nuthatch or something. It's just a little nondescript bird. And it spends half of its time in Delaware and the rest in Brazil. And the researcher that was studying these birds noticed that their migration was not, it didn't happen at a consistent time. So he started to look at like what he could correlate, if he could find any, fundamentals that were influencing the migratory behavior of these birds. And he discovered somehow that you could predict the severity of the hurricane season, which may not start for months, by the timing of the bird's migration. And it struck me particularly because it proves precognition. I don't think there's really any way around acknowledging that. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. ESP was last week, but I saw that last night, and just really struck me that they've proven this. And I think that this idea that consciousness, that the universe is somehow fundamentally consciousness, that exists also outside of time, explains this. And I think that theories like Dennis McKenna about how different psychedelics will bring down filters and let more information through. I think that different species have different settings. And so precognition, I think for humans, is sort of sporadic. In my experience anyways, it's been just random, just like here and there, occasional out of nowhere kind of, it's not like I can do it all the time or something. I've had tons of experiences that I think are inarguably precognition, but it's not like this consistent feature of my consciousness, as is the case with these birds. So, the big bounce. Totally got off track there, but I wanted to make sure I got to the bird. Okay, so we're following this idea of the observer effect back. No, we did talk about that. Oh, no, we never got to the big bounce part. Okay, so we were talking about how the observer effect implies that energy would have remained in a non-determinate state until it was observed, so consciousness must have preceded order. those are the implications to me anyways. So a few years ago, I saw an article in Scientific American, and it was probably the cover story. It said, "Was the Big Bang not really the beginning?" And that got my attention. So I read the article, and they were talking about the Big Bounce, which was basically a big bounce that preceded the Big Bang. And what struck me, though, is the way the physicist expressed it in layman's terms. She said the best way that I can explain it is that it is as if a pre-existing state reflected itself. Now, in terms of metaphysical, or I guess even spiritual implications, there's a whole lot there, particularly if you studied like Jewish mysticism, this idea that nothingness became conscious, and that thought, I am a hey itself. Well, it says reconnecting. I don't know if we're okay. A pre-existing state reflecting itself sounds a whole lot like the deity, for lack of a better word, suddenly realizing it was there. And of course, the description of the process that created the universe by mystics from different traditions all over the planet for, I'm sure at least 2,000 years. I've read examples going back that far of this description of this process of replication by reflection. And so when physics and mysticism dovetail like that, I think it should really get our attention. And why is it important to scrutinize these things so closely? If you guys are like me, seeking truth and not just ideas that we like, and just integrate into our worldview, I don't think that's good. And if the observer effect is exaggerated and sold to people that really believe in it, and it could be an impediment, and it can be destructive. And so I think it is important to go through this stuff with a fine-tooth comb. And I think it's also really exciting that when we do, it's not like it all just vanishes. When you inspect this stuff really objectively and thoroughly, there's still something there in terms of the potential of the relationship between consciousness and subatomic particles and the implications of that. Another thing that Hagelin talks about a lot is the idea that everything, if it's all made of consciousness, everything is in some way conscious. Our consciousness is going to be far more complex probably than that of a rock, but it still has something along the lines of consciousness. And when I was listening to him talk about this, it inspired this thought that seems worthy to share. I think a lot of our perception of indigenous ontological interpretations, like if a Navajo said to a European, well, we think that the rock is alive. I actually have good friends that are Diné or Navajo, and I've spoken to them. I don't speak it or understand it, but I've had really long, in-depth conversations with a friend of mine named Black Horse about how they use language. And so it's very different from the way that we use language. Metaphor doesn't even quite do it justice. So what I'm getting at is that I think that when the native said, we believe the rock is alive, what he was really trying to say is everything is conscious. And I think that a lot of the perception, it's gotten better, but it was actually caused by mistranslations. So that was an interesting thought, that also that I think Timothy Leary used to talk a lot about how we had memory going all the way back to the Big Bang in every cell in our body, and that we can actually remember for ourselves how we got here, what happened, that we contain within us all of the information. Some have suggested future events as well. In fact, Jerry Garcia in Rolling Stone magazine was once asked how they played, like 3,000 songs. They never repeated a set list. They always played the songs differently every time. They said, how is that even possible? And he said, well, there's this sort of like a filing cabinet that contains all the information past and present, and I can just kind of pull out whatever I want, which was a crazy thing to say to Rolling Stone magazine in 1987, But I think that's, very likely. Also, I want to mention the tendency for scientists to withhold information. Paul Stamets a little while back was talking about how he had 2 precognition experiences that he was absolutely 100% convinced were authentic. He wrote them down, including the date, specific details. He told people about it so that he had witnesses, because he knew at the time this is a precognition. But he also said that he never would have told anyone outside of his immediate circle of friends. He never would have brought this to the attention of the scientific community because he would have feared for his reputation. And so if we assume that there are many, many scientists that deny these experiences of transcendence or precognition or imply something other than just a blind deterministic universe, they have these experiences and they don't tell us about them. And these are the people that I think primarily inform us as to what the parameters of our worldview should be. And that, I think, was a pretty powerful revelation to hear from him, that these guys will actually deny having had these experiences. And while we're on the subject, I don't really understand what the problem is. In the last live stream, I talked about the guy at Cornell that did successful experiments. They were peer reviewed, nothing wrong with his protocol, right? The most legit experiments of this type to ever produce a positive result. It was not huge, but it was significant enough that, was considered proof. And I noticed that the reactions from the other scientists were horrified. They were questioning the scientific method itself rather than acknowledging the possibility that this guy's findings were true. And I don't see how that serves science. And I don't really understand. It's not like it even threatens their models to expand to include these possibilities, like the role of consciousness in determining the state of energy. So I guess we should talk a little bit about my experiences that have provoked me to accept the possibility that our consciousness is able to influence events, to manifest, so to speak. And I think it's important to point out too that when I had these experiences, I was not hip to pop culture. I didn't know that manifestation was this thing, like a trend or whatever. I had no idea that these ideas were popular. It was just what I was experiencing. And so without getting into all the very specific details, when I realized that I thought I could do this, I was in a very small mountain town in Colorado, and I needed very, very specific type of people with very, very specific skill sets. And I made this big long list of the things that I was like ordering from the universe, and every detail. I mean, I asked for a girl with a very specific description, age, hair color, all of these details. She was living in my house 2 weeks later. All of the people that I needed for the band that I was trying to manifest, it turned out I already knew them all. And the circumstances were actually way, way better in a lot of ways than I could have even hoped for. And I've done this a number of times. Actually, one of the weirdest examples, just one more that I'll share with you. I made this comment to my then wife that I wished that Dark Star Orchestra, who is, in case you don't know, a super famous Grateful Dead tribute band, I just said to her, I wish they would have like a school where you could go and like learn this music directly from them. And 10 days later, she hands me her phone, and it's a one-time only event the next month. And it was called Dark Star Orchestra High School. And like, I had literally just, that's such a random, weird thing to just think, and then it happens. And I guess you could include times where it's almost like the universe did it without my influence. It's not like I was manifesting, but here's an example. I was working with some guys, and we were pulling apart a, it's like an overhang on a ceiling, and there's insulation. And my girlfriend calls. I put her on speakerphone, and she's telling me that she just took a picture of 4 bears in a tree in the front yard. And so I get off the phone and I pull the insulation out, and 3 bear claws drop out of the insulation onto the deck. And there were 2 other people that heard the phone call, because speakerphone, I put it down, just kept doing stuff, and, one of them walks over, and his response was kind of like the scientists that, they'd rather abandon science than accept possibilities that are outside of their worldview or whatever. He was a hunter, and he knew they were bear claws, but he's like, those have to be from a parrot or something. That couldn't have just happened. There's just no way that just happened, And so he picked them up, and he's like, those are definitely bear claws. And so those kind of manifestations, actually, I'll share one more with you that you guys can check out yourselves. I made a video a while back that is very obviously videoed in 4 different places: in the jungle, by the ocean, and it was filmed out of sequence, and it's like 30 something minutes long. So I'm talking about coincidences involving the numbers 11 and 11, which is another thing that I've noticed has gotten absolutely huge and trendy. And by the way, you guys, I saw a short clip of Maynard James Keenan from Tool from the 90s. And he was telling the interviewer that there are stages in the awakening process, and that one of the first things that you'll notice is these number synchronicities. And so I'm just mentioning this because I used to kind of look down on any kind of like popular spiritual trend, but I realized that this is what everyone experiences, and it's not just a trend. It really is happening to people. And the example that I was going to give you from my Phoenix process video, after I made it, I'm like searching and searching and searching, trying to find where I knew I had mentioned the 1111 synchronicities. And I was looking to put the link card. And eventually I clicked on 1111, and it's perfect. 1111. And I'm like literally talking about how if you're in the state of mind, thinking about this kind of stuff can even provoke it to happen. And that's what happened. And I mean, you can accuse me of editing it, but I think if you watch it, it would have been really difficult to do. And also I don't edit the videos. So even that eliminates subconsciously, like if my subconscious mind had somehow figured out, and it actually happens twice in that video, I think at around 23 minutes, I'm talking about a specific meditation where you freeze an image and try to hold it as long as you can. in order to improve concentration. And as soon as I say freeze the image in your mind, the computer glitches out the recording and my face freezes for like 15 seconds. So I guess what I'm saying is that, subjectively, my experience very strongly suggests that somehow there is a connection between consciousness and energy. But I think it's also very difficult to explain how that would transpire. I don't believe that those bear claws, for example, just materialized there because of the phone call from my girlfriend and the universe was trying to prove something or make a point. I think that that is true, that the universe may have been communicating and making a point, but there are a lot of Native Americans in that area, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a tradition to put some bear claws somewhere in the structure as like a blessing or for protection, or I should just ask one of my Dene friends, but the deterministic material explanation is going to be there. Like the impossible is not going to happen because your consciousness is connected to subatomic particles. A great magician once wrote that the most common mistake that the magician will make is to think that his magic can do more for him than it can. And I talk about this a lot, how, once you realize that you have precognition, you've experienced it a few times, maybe you have good intuition, you can start mistaking just your random thoughts for intuitions and actually pursue them to your detriment when they're out to have been an illusion. Let's see, what else have we? Oh, I mentioned Dr. Emoto, and not doctor, he's not a doctor. I don't know why I just said that. Mr. Emoto. This is a very famous experiment, and it is widely accepted by people as true. People really like this idea. And I'm not necessarily refuting the concept, but you shouldn't even have to look past the pictures of okay, so if you're not familiar, he had posited that if you vibrate an intention, even by, I think he wrote love and taped it to the bottle or something and then froze them, that the water crystals take on the form of that frequency. Now, if this was true for the frequency of love, every crystal would have the same shape because it's expressing that frequency in form. And this is something that sound definitely does. I'm sure you guys have seen the sheets of metal, and they're vibrated in these, super elaborate, really intricate patterns, symmetrical. So that's the thing for sound, right? And I definitely believe that we emanate energy for sure. I'm only criticizing what is presented as evidence here, right? So also, and this is where he kills himself, the slide that is supposed to represent negative emotions has obviously been dyed or colored like vomit yellow and green. You cannot alter your evidence in order to enhance your findings that negates your experiment, that alone. And you can just look at the slides and you can see that it's probably some oil and water. It just looks like blobs, doesn't even look frozen. It is a little bit alarming to me how many people bought into that one, because honestly, when I was watching that movie, What the Bleep, that made the experiment famous, I was like, I don't know if this really sounds legit. And so, I've done some research, and there's no scientific protocol at all. It's not repeatable. So I just wanted to touch on that because it's kind of related. It is this idea that consciousness affects things on some subatomic level. Water is a lot. It's very dense compared to like a subatomic particle, right? And I think that we do have this constant interaction with all the energy around us for sure, but it's very subtle. And that's what I was getting to with the, thinking that magic can do more for you than it can. Taking these ideas without scrutiny gets people into trouble for sure. Spectrum of emotion, not a spectrum of crystal shape. No, there are different shapes to the individual crystals, but they're not like a bunch of crystals that are the same shape for love. And, I haven't looked into this, but I'm pretty sure also that ice crystals don't look like that when they freeze. Those are snowflakes. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure about that. But yeah, I mean, and here's the thing. This is why we were tricked. When a massive corporation puts out what is ostensibly a documentary, I think we take for granted that they did the research and confirmed, for example, that Emoto's experiment was even an actual experiment, which it doesn't seem to be that is the case. He also did something with rice that when other people tried to repeat, it doesn't work consistently. There's no statistical difference. Like it's nothing. It's nothing. The rice. I don't remember exactly the details, but it's nothing. It means nothing scientifically. So what I was saying is that I think when a large corporation like that puts out a major film, you assume that they've done the research and that they're not going to just present complete crap to you as truth, but they certainly have. So I'd also like to ask you guys if you know of any interesting studies regarding this stuff. Please put them in the comments. I'm always looking for more information. I should mention, I guess, a couple of other experiments that have been done that seem to imply that consciousness has some impact, even to the extent of affecting like macro things like machines. There was a reputable study that implied that consciousness can affect random number generators, very, very minuscule, but that it's measurable. And there was one other. They said that it could even potentially affect slot machines, but it's, again, very, very, very minuscule. So I'm definitely not advising anyone to go out and try to use their mind to win money on a slot machine. So I guess, the main bullet point here that I'm trying to offer is that I believe that there's something to this, but I think that we just need to kind of really like scrutinize our sources and do a little bit more investigating, because I think when the spiritual community at large accepts ideas that are not, that are very easily, it doesn't look good, and I think that because gnosis and spiritual evolution is the antidote for the global chaostrophe, that we do need to be conscious of the image that we are extending and presenting in social media and elsewhere. I think the more of us that are able to be objective and scrutinize our spiritual and metaphysical beliefs just as closely as we do with everything else in life with the same standards, we're going to be a lot more effective. And not only that, but it's going to be, yes, I am in Ecuador. Year of technology glitching on your tripping. I don't know that I've ever really experienced anything along those lines myself. But since we're on the topic of consciousness and energy, I'll tell you a couple of stories and describe a phenomenon that I think is very common. And it's one of those things, the mystery presenting itself in a way that casts doubt upon itself. Because people are able to say, well, you guys were tripping, so this isn't legitimate, you know. I don't believe that at all. And I mean, if you have experience with psychedelics, you know that unless you're taking datura or even at massive doses, the hallucinations are distinguishable from reality. And unless you've really taken a massive dose, it's not hard to distinguish at all between, you know, like a horse. You're not going to like see horses. I personally have never hallucinated like that, even with massive doses, where I've seen things that appeared to be real and were not. You know, it's never been like that for me, and I don't think it's very common for others. What I'm getting at there is that I think the tendency to dismiss people for those reasons and these experiences is not. So here's the thing. And I was reminded of this the other day by a comedian. It might have been Shane Mouse. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. But he was talking about this, how things happen when you're tripping that would never normally happen. And, you know, just like crazy random. So here's an example. This friend, and I think it's important to note too, that he was very science oriented. He's definitely an atheist. He didn't believe in any woo. He wasn't that type of person. And not particularly closed-minded, but definitely not embracing any of that. I think he was a psychologist too, a PhD psychologist. And him and his girlfriend had eaten a reasonable dose of mushrooms. He said, you know, they weren't really that high, maybe split an eighth or something. And they were walking by a field, and he said these horses came out and they lined up perfectly looking at them. And then they walked around in a circle, and then they lined up again, and they all sat down like dogs. And he looked embarrassed telling me, you know, that he had this experience. But I think that also experiences with altered consciousness, I have noticed, and this is another thing that people would say, well, that's because you've been taking psychedelics and your mind is bent or something. And it's definitely not the case. But synchronicities and experiences, telepathy and precognition do seem to increase after use of psychedelic compounds. And I've also become convinced that microdosing will give you better access to these capacities of consciousness. I heard it referred to as Daniel Pinchbeck called it an occult hangover. And that was really intense for me when I had my first DMT experiences. And right afterwards, I experienced all of this really weird stuff. And I knew that I hadn't lost it, like the DMT hadn't caused a psychotic break, because some of the coincidences involved physical objects. Like we were talking about a ruler, or we were talking about the number 11. My girlfriend was an artist. She's drawing, and she's getting frustrated. And I asked her, what is your deal? And she's like, I don't know. And then she looks at the ruler, and there are 2 11s printed on it. And we're talking about the, numerological qualities of 11. And this happens. And the other 11, the second 11, was where the 23 should be. And 23 is the number of synchronicity. And so, experiences like that where the ruler was still there the next day. It's not like we were like tripping. We weren't tripping when this happened either, but it was like shortly after my first contact with DMT that these experiences just super accelerated. And I've never really decided exactly what I think that's about. Is it that these things happen all the time and we don't notice them because our pre-psychedelic consciousness is not attenuated? I have definitely become convinced that people will actually just fail to perceive things that they don't believe in. And this has been substantiated in clinical studies where they've determined that they actually get better results studying precognition from people that believe in it and people that don't, because the people that don't are precluding and therefore disallowing the mind from having perceptions it doesn't think it can have. And I think that this happens to a much greater extent than people really think. There are many, many things that I have noticed and pointed out to other people that, like one of them was this little glowing bug in Virginia. And I was like 16 the first time I noticed it. It's not a firefly. It's not a glowworm. I never found out what it was, but I'd never seen it. And then I was walking along and they were everywhere. And I just thought, how can these glowing things, how could I have missed them? And so over the next year, every time I saw them and I was, hanging out with other kids or whatever, no one had ever noticed them either until I pointed them out. There's a story in What the Bleep, I know I've been kind of ragging on that movie a little bit tonight. It's not all bad, and I do support the premise, just not their manipulation of facts. But this is a story that exists outside of the movie as well. There's a tribe, I think it's Columbus, that's coming. And the tribe had never seen ships before. So the shaman, with his expanded consciousness, is the only one that's able to perceive them. The rest of the tribe just sees ripples in the water and doesn't know why. Once the shaman tells them that there are ships, they all perceive the ships. So that's one potential explanation. The hardest part of synchronicity is, how could it be arranged like that? If you try to trace back like that ruler with the 2 11s, if that was like the product of a conscious universe or something, it would have had to arrange a lot of circumstances a long time ago. This stuff pretty much would have had to have been embedded in the structure, I guess, or in the storyline at the moment of the Big Bang, really. So that's always really bugged me. Like, what is the mechanism that facilitates these things or allows them to happen? Another time that I should mention that I actually did this consciously, that was right around that same period, a group of friends and I had gone to see Tool at Red Rocks. And on the way there, a bunch of really bizarre stuff happened. And we had been experiencing the synchronicities and all of this kind of stuff for, months, I think, at this point. And so we got to the Tool concert and we were standing around by my car talking about all this weirdness. And I said, I'm going to apply synchronicity. Like, I'm going to do it right now consciously. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, except that was the mission. I walked not 10 feet away, and this guy gets out of the porta potty with a sign around his neck that says applied synchronicity. So I'm like, what? Will you come here? And he just did, and walks over to my group of friends. And we had been discussing a very specific, the chances that this guy would just butt right into the conversation as if he had been there for months. Like, he knew where our heads were at, what was happening with us, so that level of experience. And one of the reasons that I'm sharing those particular experiences is that I wasn't alone. So it sort of reduces the probability that DMT caused some kind of psychotic break. Also, I think we should note that usually, or perhaps even always, if you are not predisposed to a mental illness, psychedelics won't trigger it. And if they do, they're probably going to do it every time. So I don't think that that's viable in most cases when people, Also, I'm sharing this with you because if you guys have these experiences, it kind of freaked me out. I was a little worried for a second, until the experiences started happening around a lot of other people. And then, I relaxed a lot, thinking, okay, there's no way that I'm imagining this stuff because there's 6 of us standing here. So again, I don't know if any of that has anything to do with consciousness influencing energy, but I think it at least establishes that there is some level of interaction or communication with the energy in our being and the external world. There are other explanations. There's also the possibility of just sheer coincidence, which I think for me, the number of experiences that I've had that I find, indisputable in terms of telepathy or precognition. The idea of coincidence just doesn't really, just pure coincidence. But we have to acknowledge that if determinists or deterministic materialist, atheist, whatever non-spiritual types are correct, the universe is an aggregate of highly improbable coincidences, a whole bunch of them, like really, really, really improbable ones. So I've heard synchronicity potentially explained as the simple fact that when you are in a system that has this much information in it, it's just going to happen just because of the sheer volume of experiences. One of the other elements of my own experiences that I think suggests a higher mind is that the synchronicities that I experienced had conceptual continuity. It's not like they were just like random coincidences that were thematically connected to what was being discussed, or they were leading somewhere. For example, the 1111 ruler that I mentioned, 2 weeks later, my roommate got an email from Golden Light Eagle, the Sioux Sundance chief, inviting us to the ceremonies and the talks in New Mexico. And the main subject of his talk was 1111 frequencies and the synchronicities. And so that was crazy. It's like the universe was proving its capacity to precognize. I mean, I almost took it as maybe evidence of a god, because we have these weird experiences with 1111, and then we're called to go listen to this talk randomly, and this wasn't a hugely popular thing yet. This was like 10 years ago. So, but you see what I'm saying? It's almost as if the synchronicities were demonstrating to me that there is a higher mind by precognizing or manifesting evidence that it knew what was coming next. Something did, and wanted me to know that it's there, and I've never really settled on an explanation, but I still don't. I mean, I would still consider that a possibility for sure, that there's something like a god. Can you take Yopo multiple times a day? I don't know that you would want to. I don't think it would do you any harm. It will definitely continue to work. I don't really want to advise anything there. But yeah, I mean, I'm quite certain that you can. I think it should be considered that dimethyltryptamine is not the only compound. There are a lot. It is like a alkaloid cocktail. So, and some of them are kind of toxic. So I would be careful with that. You could always take some Harmalas and extend the experience. Well, thank you, Mr. Wombat, and I think it's important to consider these things in this way and really take some time to figure out what it all means. And I've been dealing with this stuff for decades now, and I still don't really have answers, only general ideas. I mean, you guys, the video that I mentioned earlier, where with all of the out of sequence filming, and you should check that out. Go click on the video, go right to 1111, click on it. I mean, it's perfect. How in the hell does that happen unless there is some greater organizing principle at work. And the closest thing that I've come, I guess, to a belief system for myself, this is something that has been bubbling up out of my subconscious over and over and over again lately. I think because the idea hasn't totally coagulated and congealed yet, but it's basically that the universe is pure consciousness, and it is consciousness that gives form to energy by way of number, and that gives it a geometrical expression, which even on the plane of energy is the geometries have something to do with how these energies interact. And like I said, this hasn't totally solidified, so I don't want to try to talk about it too much. But that's basically what I've thought for a very long time, that it's not exactly that there's a God, but consciousness is the organizing principle. Without consciousness, there would be no form. There would only be chaos. And I think that these experiences of synchronicity are evidence that we exist in a conscious universe. For me, there's really no other way to satisfactorily explain why we have these experiences. And wait, volume, I guess. Well, that's what I was saying, Wombat, that that's why I think that there's something more to it than coincidence, because these experiences often have conceptual continuity in such a way that they are actually leading somewhere. And if I had only experienced that once, I could dismiss it more easily as coincidence. But because it's happened to me so many times, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen the video I made about the time I decided I want to talk to Danny Carey and drove right to him. I mean, that is crazy. That guy could have been anywhere, you know, and it was really far. I drove like 1,300 miles or something, and I arrived randomly to the place where he was within 30 minutes of his arrival. And we were stuck in Vegas for 3 days, which kind of suggests that something higher is manipulating circumstances in order to, it's like it's a cooperative effort, you know, co-creation. And if this is all true, we can assume that our consciousness has arranged elements of our future to the extent that it is capable that are going to surprise and delight us. So it's definitely, you know, I guess the rule here is that we have to accept that it is unclear whether consciousness and energy really do have a scientifically proven and established connection. It is definitely not something physicists are in agreement about. So I think it's definitely worthy of cultivating our capacity to, we should do this anyway, know exactly what we want, you know, constrain every breath, every action, every deed to our highest purpose, to become better at this every single day, to expand in as many directions as possible, you know, learn everything you possibly can about the physical universe, the non-physical universe, contemplate, you know, and you just have to exercise caution and don't overstep your bounds. Who wrote How to Change Your Mind? Do you know the author, Swervo? Phoenix, I'm not sure if you just came on. I think I have read that book, actually. We discussed this, but I'll reiterate. Without consciousness, there wouldn't be a world to experience. Would a world without a consciousness exist? Again, I was saying that, you know, if it's true, even if the Copenhagen interpretation isn't exactly correct, that it is observation that influences the particle's decision, right? and it splits into multiple universes. Either way, if consciousness is what causes the probability clouds to collapse, then no, there wouldn't be a universe without consciousness. So, as I was saying before, it sort of, at least to me, is like the best evidence that there's some kind of, I don't want to use the word God, but some sort of consciousness that existed before order. And that just reminded me of something else. Scientists have proven that consciousness does not require us to be alive. Whether or not this is just a temporary, I don't know that we have, no one's ever been dead for 2 hours and come back. I don't think that happens. So we're talking about minutes of brain activity. But conclusively, we know for sure that awareness persists when someone is clinically dead. And it's another one of those scenarios where the reaction of the scientists just baffles me. They just hate this kind of stuff. And I don't understand why. If they're there to investigate the universe, what is this weird prejudice, Right on. So I think also a thing to consider is that consciousness is energy. In my opinion, and one of the secrets of the mystery traditions is that light is the source of consciousness, and even some takes perceptions of this is that light is consciousness, and so likewise, and so consciousness is definitely, at least, somehow generated by energy. That seems like a fair assumption. And if energy cannot be destroyed and only transformed, I would take that as at least anecdotal evidence that consciousness continues. And again, I think this is an idea that's very easy to distort. It doesn't prove anything. And I have seen some videos recently where people were saying because, consciousness is energy and energy can't be destroyed, we're eternal. It doesn't mean that we have awareness, the same awareness. You know what I mean? It doesn't quite prove it, but it does kind of imply it. And also the ideas about the transtemporal nature of consciousness. And this is another one that the scientists got really upset about, because they said that the precognition experiment implied that time runs forwards and backwards. Physicists say that physics implies that. Why was it horrifying and threatening that some capacity of our consciousness demonstrated a capacity that reinforces an idea that already exists in science just because it was presented in the context of the mind having access to this somehow? It's just a very strange thing. And it's kind of encouraging too, because it really implies that they've missed a lot. They've probably really missed a lot. And these contemplations and investigations that we're doing definitely have some value. So let's see what else. Is there anything else? It's been about an hour. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. And thanks a lot for your support. Some of you guys have contributed to keep the mission moving. Speaking of keeping the mission moving, you guys know that my objective with this channel and my life, I guess, in general, is the hopes of building a network or community, or at least encouraging like conscious people to empower themselves, to embrace, wealth so that they can empower others, to increase our power and to, become more adept at balancing open-mindedness and skepticism and, all of this stuff. And so yesterday, neighbor who owns what he describes as a love commune came over for coffee, and he has this idea about trying to create a community. Eventually, he's trying to influence the entire planet and create this horizontal government. So I'll probably start putting the links to some of his videos in the description or whatever. But he's serious about impact. I think his idea is pretty good, and he didn't know anything about Facebook ads. And when I mentioned it, that I'm good at it, he said, well, our marketing budget is probably $1 million for that, and it really hit me that he has the funding to actually make something happen, and he's totally committed to it. So as that develops, I'll keep you guys posted, but I really want to encourage you, the group Conscious Revolution. I don't get a lot of posts in there. I want to know what's going on out there, how I can help, for you guys to network and trade skills and stuff. I think it is absolutely crucial that people that are on the path of conscious evolution really, really commit and start to unite and motivate and empower each other, because the world is in a tremendous amount of shit right now. And I'm generally positive because I understand that order comes from chaos. I understand that even though a lot of people are blaming Trump for all the craziness in the United States, I think that, it's been boiling up do Ecuadorians believe in conscious evolution? This stuff has been in the shadows already. I will answer that third eye. I just want to finish this thought. It's not like it just suddenly is there. It's just that now suddenly everyone is aware of it. And I think the totally unacceptable alternative that has been offered has also raised awareness that something is seriously wrong, and that we can't hope to fix the situation by applying the same solutions over and over again that have failed. In fact, I would say that overall the situation has gotten much, much worse. And I think that the evolution of consciousness, thank you so much, Phoenix, is the antidote. I mean, there's no question that whether it's the influence of psychedelics or meditation, hopefully both combined, or whatever causes these experiences of this greater mind that we have been trying to relate to physics in this video, the changes that it causes in people are positive. They are constrained to serve life and creativity and freedom, personal expression. And the fact that we even live in a world still where there are still people that seek to oppress, people that feel like transgendered people are doing something immoral. This kind of restrictive, oppressive consciousness, it's time for it to go. And that's something on Tuesday I'm going to do another live cast. I was going to do it this last Tuesday, but I wasn't feeling well. And I hope you guys can make it, because I think it's going to be powerful. I really hesitate to do the topical stuff because it pisses people off. It's actually hurt me, but I think it's really important to tell the truth. And I don't really see my voice or one like it really represented anywhere. So on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the influence of religion in the United States and on the world in general. And it's not just going to be a political thing, though, because I'm definitely going to talk about how establishing patterns of cognition or perception, how everything is going to have to go through the filter that is established by these religious beliefs. And that explains so much. And I also think that people don't really understand how dangerous it is in the United States, how dangerous the Christian right is, because like everyone else, they're very polite in person. but having come from the South, I know a lot of things about this culture that I think probably most upper middle class liberals have no idea. Do Ecuadorians believe in conscious evolution? Here in Ecuador, we have several different indigenous peoples, Saraguru, the Shuar, who are famous for shrinking heads. They're the head shrinking tribe of the Amazon. It depends upon who you're talking about. The mestizo or Spanish descendant population is mostly Catholic. Plant medicine and psychedelics do not have a massive culture, although it's growing here. Catholicism definitely destroyed all of that. In fact, that's how San Pedro got its name. They were trying to exorcise its demon, I guess, and name it after a saint. So that culture was very strongly oppressed. In terms of what the indigenous believe here, of course, it varies by tribe, but I will share something with you that I find very interesting regarding when we find these correlations in totally disconnected cultures. For example, in the Western occult tradition, we speak of dark magicians turning to the left, right? They serve themselves, they turn to the left, and the white magicians turning to the right, or the right-hand path. In the jungles of Borneo, it's the same. An evil sorcerer is turning to the left, healers turning to the right. So we see these correlations, and that's taken as evidence that there's something to whatever model we're observing. And so the Shuar say that the universe was created by what they describe as syllables. And this is another example, I think, of where trying to translate the Shuar language to English is not doing the concept justice. But what struck me about it, and these, by the way, the Icaros are channeled, these sounds. And I have observed at least two people that had never heard them before drink ayahuasca and start making the sounds of these syllables that are supposed to be the sounds of the spirit world. And they're very distinctive. Once you've heard them, you know. And so that's interesting. But what is even more interesting to me is that the tribe of Judea, the Jews, part of their belief is that the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the sounds that created the universe, which is, I found that to be a really interesting parallel. Yeah, I mean, of course. And that's another thing that, you guys communicate with me, because if I can contribute to any kind of cause that is worthy, I definitely will do whatever's within my power. And I am interested in getting more involved with trying to protect particularly the Amazon rainforest. But that's absolutely true. And this is something that's gotten me in a lot of trouble mentioning. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But looking at it all objectively, I mean, there are, over the last year, there have been some massive and successful lawsuits. It appears that, damage, severe damage, even death and permanent cognitive impairment has been provably linked to not the vaccines, but the additives. I just watched a interview with Dershowitz, who I don't know why it was him, but he's like this evil lawyer, and Robert Kennedy. And at one point, Dershowitz actually says, well, you can assume that if someone starts a pharmaceutical company, they care about lives. And I thought, did this guy really just say that? I mean, these companies will raise the price of a drug that people will die if they don't get. What was the one example I just saw? It went from $500 a year to $300,000 a year. When you make a decision like that, you're killing people that don't have insurance. These guys will kill people in order to make money, and you trust them to put additives in vaccines and stuff. So, like I said, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but there is this idea, and I think it's correct, that the Earth, it has an immune system, and viruses are part of that. And I don't think that we can, protect ourselves with vaccinations and all of these, other sort of unnatural ways of preventing nature's methods of population control, also while destroying the oceans almost completely. And I just I don't think that, people talk about how we could use all the resources and poison the planet to the point where it's inhabitable relatively quickly. But I think there's even greater threat to our survival is that the Earth is, COVID. I know some people say it came from a lab. And I think the fact that it's, what do they call it? Where it started is like at a lab that engineers that specific type of, it's almost like you're caught with a smoking gun with the same caliber bullets as a body, and everyone says like, oh, well, that's not connected, and I'm not saying that it is, but the point is that nature is going to try to fucking kill us, and it will succeed eventually if we don't change our lives. And most of you watching this are probably already right there with me, but I do think that we need to adapt. We need to trust more in nature, in our immune systems. I have trouble accepting that there is not going to be some kind of negative blowback eventually from vaccinated populations. And I'm not saying that they don't protect people or that you shouldn't take them necessarily even, but we're definitely disrupting the balance. And I think our faith in our medical system, while we're on the subject a little bit, is badly misguided. This guy Dershowitz is like a lawyer for the evilest people on the planet. I looked him up to see who he was. And so when he says, you can assume that whoever started a pharmaceutical company cares about saving lives, he doesn't believe that, and he's saying it anyways. And the people hired this particular attorney to represent them when there's been severe PR damage. Why is the pharmaceutical company using this guy to debate Kennedy unless there is something, but that's not really the point. It is actually cancer, for example, billions of dollars a year. It's worse than ever. Skyrocketing cancer rates, autoimmune conditions. I have one. It's been debilitating for forever. This is extremely common. All this stuff is on the rise, and everybody just, totally trust big pharma and the medical establishment. And I think that's proven to be unwise. And it is a very frightening manifestation of selective perception, I think, that so many people don't question these things a little bit more. So, hell yeah, man, we got to do something about the environment. Chinese fleet, fishing ships has just invaded the Galapagos here. It's supposed to be protected. They've already taken at least one tagged whale. It's definitely situation critical. And it's also really frightening. I think the global warming hoax people, they're being puppeted by the very people that they think they're exposing. I've said that before on this channel, and it's horrifying that they can do that. Okay, so seriously, good night, you guys. Thanks a lot for watching. Tuesday, Big Pharma, Jesus, and what we can do to stop them. And then this coming Friday, we're going to do sort of like the highlights of my ayahuasca experiences, like the most outrageous, amazing things that have occurred. with all those experiences. So check that out. Hit the like button if you haven't. Please do support us on Patreon so that we can continue to make videos and hopefully make them more professional. So thanks a lot and good night.